Welcome to True Crime Cases, where we delve into the darkest corners of human nature. At the heart of this heartbreaking story were two people whose lives became inexorably linked. Aitana Smith, a 32-year-old English professor at Briarcliff Community College, was known for her sharp mind and appealing lectures. Maxwell, who was struggling freshman with hopes of becoming the writer, was drawn to her as a moth to a flame. What began as mentorship gradually twisted into a web of manipulation, desire, and eventually murder as investigators peeled back the layers. During their relationship, they discovered dark story of exploitation, obsession, twisted fantasies, and fatal desperation. Aitana Smith's voyage to Briarcliff was paved with academic awards, psychological angst born of rich parents in Boston. Aitana demonstrated early signs of her father possessed great intelligence. Stern is an investment banker, while her mother is socialite with a fondness for cocktails. Provided Aitana with all materials, advantage but limited emotional support. From a young age, Aitana learned to use her intellect as a shield, burying. To avoid the cold, she immersed herself in reading. In her home life, she excelled. School, skipped 2 grades and entered. Aitana went to Harvard, where she realized her interest for English literature and her talent for engaging an audience. After completing, Aitana appeared destined to get her PhD from Yale. For a prominent role at an Ivy League institution, a scan having an affair with her married thesis advisor ruined those plans. Whispered criticisms among the academic community, Aitana was driven by her barely veiled rejection. Seeking safety in the little town of Briarcliff at Briarcliff Community College, Aitana quickly developed. As a rising star, she talks on Renaissance literature and contemporary poetry, drew students from other departments. Her innovative teaching methods garnered her admiration of both co-workers and pupils. Dr. Smith was the epitome of success, sparkling and gorgeous. Committed to her craft, yet behind the immaculate exterior hid a woman plagued by her background and fueled by an unquenchable need for affirmation. Aitana's relationships were typically heated, short-lived, leaving her feeling hollow, misunderstood. She sought the adoration for her students, bathing in their admiration and subtle encouragement. Their reliance on her advice. Psychological evaluation was conducted following her arrest, would eventually expose a complicated personality disorder is defined by narcissistic characteristics, and a deep-seated fear of abandonment was this. A deadly combination of intelligence, charisma, and unresolved emotional problems that set the scene for her fateful encounter with Maxwell Holloway. Within him, Aitana noticed more than simply another pupil mold, but an opportunity to recover youth. Maxwell's desire was melting away. Holloway's path to the Briarcliff Community College was anything from typical. Born in a Maxwell was a working-class neighborhood, the youngest of 4 children in a family. He strained to make ends meet. The father, a construction worker, stayed long. His mother spent hours on job sites, juggled several part-time jobs to keep. Maxwell had food on the table since a young age. I found consolation in the realm of literature. His siblings excelled at sports. Maxwell dreamed of practical talents. He was frequently found with his family, writing stories in tattered notebooks or lost between the pages of tattered paperbacks. Maxwell borrowed from the local library. High school years were characterized by academic inconsistency, brilliant in subjects that captured his imagination like English. In history, he struggled with the strict structures of math and science. Ms. Ramirez, a guidance counselor, recalled Maxwell had a spark of genius when it arrived. He wanted to write but lacked the discipline and confidence to genuinely flourish. Regardless, Maxwell's potential grades were mediocre, and his SAT scores fell short of his dreams. Rejection letters, his dream colleges, were bitter pill to take, yet underlying Maxwell's artistic temperament laying a young man dealing with self-doubt, and there was a tremendous demand for validation. This combination of natural skill is emotional fragility and an intense desire to prove himself that made Maxwell wonderful. Aitana, Gosling's target of manipulation, saw not only a mentor, but an entrance to the intellectual artistic world he so strongly wanted to enter. As the fall semester started, Maxwell could never believed that his pursuit of literary genius would lead him down the dark path of ethical compromises. Emotional involvement, eventually leading to the beaches of Lake Briarcliff, where a young life would be cut tragically short. The first day of advanced composition class was a turning point for both Aitana, Maxwell's life, but neither could have foretold their sad course. Pathways would lead Aitana perfectly, clothed in a fitted blazer and pencil. Skirt commanded the room with her. Her gaze surveyed the sea of fresh faces, pause momentarily on Zane, huddled in the back row uneasily, fiddled with his pen as Aitana launched. During her initial talk on To the Power of Narrative, Maxwell found himself enthralled. Her words appeared to talk directly to him, instilling a passion in him had long been buried when she asked class to share their favorite writers. Maxwell startled Ed by increasing his voice quiver slightly as he remarked about his appreciation for James. Baldwin earned an approved nod from after class. Aitana approached. Maxwell has been delighted by his insight, advised him to consider submitting work for the college literary magazine. Maxwell glowed with pride. He mumbled his thanks for the brief. Connection sowed the seeds of what would become an unhealthy obsession for both of them. In the next weeks, Maxwell became a staple at Aitana's office. Hours that began as chats regarding assignments gradually grew into profound conversations on literature life, and Aitana acknowledges Maxwell's aspirations. Maxwell's raw skill and vulnerability began to quietly alter their interactions. She would lean in closer while reviewing. Her perfume lingered in her comment was a thoughtful combination of praise and criticism, are intended to keep Maxwell as continuously seeking her approval. Shared personal anecdotes, establishing an illusion of intimacy, distorted the lines from the student-teacher. Maxwell's connection with his classmate Amelia later informed investigators that we all noticed how Dr. Goling treated Maxwell differently. At first we were only jealous of however, looking back, there's something wrong about midterms, approached Maxwell, who was struggling in his other classes. Face pressure to keep his scholarship weighed heavily on him. Sensing his pain, Heave made her first overt movement after an especially long. During the office meeting, she placed her hand on Maxwell's arm and murmured softly, "I see. You have a lot of promise, Maxwell, and I would hate to watch it go to waste because of a few challenging classes. Perhaps we could make an agreement to assure your Maxwell is inexperienced and desperate to succeed. Prove himself. Failed to recognize he was entering perilous terrain." I interpreted Aitana's offer as a lifeline, a chance to focus on his actual passion. Without fear of losing his scholarship, as autumn painted the Briarcliff campus in tones of gold red, Aitana and Maxwell's relationship she intensified and invited him to exclusive literary events that introduced him to her colleagues as a promising protege. Maxwell, intoxicated with this new universe of cognitive stimulation and perceived belonging, came to rely on Aitana. For Aitana, this is more than simply academic guidance. For her part, she delighted in Maxwell. She meticulously constructed every interaction to deepen his emotions, attachment while remaining plausible. She denied to her co-workers that she was simply fostering a gifted student. To Maxwell, she became by the fall. The semester was coming to a conclusion. The border between mentor and student become irreversibly blurred. Maxwell's literature was once packed with diverse influences, now resembled Aitana's style, and inclinations of his social circle diminished as he spent more of his time dedicated to extra study sessions with Dr. Neither Maxwell nor Aitana fully recognized how hazardous the web was. Weaving as winter break neared, their relationship teetered on the brink of a precipice about to dive in depths from which there will be no returning. From Christmas vacation indicated Aitana experience as a vital turning point. Maxwell's relationship to the campus mostly deserted. They found themselves sucked into a vortex of intensification. Aitana experienced emotions and crossed boundaries. Under the pretense of offering additional mentorship, invited Maxwell to her off-campus apartment to discuss his last paper for her class in the evening. started simply enough with Aitana, serving tea and engaging Maxwell in a furious debate regarding postmodern literature, but as the hours went by, inhibitions decreased, the atmosphere shifted. Aitana, her voice dropped to a near whisper, began to share personal anecdotes about her own challenges as a young academic. She portrayed herself as misunderstood, genius, hounded by jealous colleagues, and bound by the strict architecture of academia. Maxwell, is already impressed by Aitana's intelligence, was drawn deeper. In her world, he recognized a kindred spirit, was someone who fully grasped the artist's struggles. When Aitana's hand rubbed against the electric charge, what they shared was undeniable. What happened next was a point of dispute in the later investigation. Aitana alleged that Maxwell began. Maxwell's youthful passion overcomes their kiss. In his closing argument, he argued that Aitana orchestrated the entire evening to this end, regardless matter whether the initial move that night was marked the start of a physical connection. This would have disastrous effects. As the new semester began, Aitana Maxwell's secret affair has intensified. Closed meetings in her office into extended weekends at lonely beds and breakfasts, Aitana showered Maxwell with gifts, rare books, fancy pens, and a laptop. To replace his obsolete model, she framed each contribution represents an investment in his future as a writer, further bond him to her. Maxwell's grades had been mediocre. His other classes have suddenly risen. Aitana used her influence to interfere, on his behalf, with other academicians, painting him as a misunderstood genius. She merely needed the appropriate coaching. I promised Maxwell that with her aid, he'd possibly get into a prestigious MFA program, skipping the typical criteria. However, Maxwell's dependence on Aitana intensified, as did his concern. The immediate excitement of their illicit love began to give way to remorse and fear of discovery. Writing, once vivid and original, became a weak replica of Aitana's style. His few, the remaining friends, saw his increasing Aitana exhibit solitude and unstable behavior. Feeling Maxwell's unease, doubled down on her manipulation. She switched between effusive praise and harsh criticism. Keeping Maxwell in a continual state of mental agony, she persuaded him that their relationship was special, and they met of dual spirits in the ordinary world. Could never understand in a particular. Aitana began to insinuate Maxwell's success was completely depending on her goodwill. During one, she had an uncomfortable confrontation in her office. He casually mentioned that it would be a pity if the ethics board were supposed to investigate your grades have suddenly improved. Might have the wrong impression about how you have been earning. The implicit Maxwell was trapped between a clear threat. His desire and developing sense of moral discomfort began to retreat into his journal notes. From this period, later retrieved by detectives, create a picture of a young man in deep I'm in mental discomfort on February 15th. I don't know who I am anymore, and it feels polluted. But how can something so terrible feel so vital? March 3rd, she claims she's the only one who actually understands me. Maybe she is right, the prospect of losing her. What scares me the most is spring blossomed on the Briarcliff campus. The web of lies and manipulation had gotten so dense that Maxwell could hardly remember his life before Aitana. Family is concerned by his rarely calls home. Arranged a surprise visit. Aitana, paranoid about discovery, forced Maxwell to rebuff them, resulting in it was a difficult rift. At this time, Maxwell began to confide in him. Trevor, the roommate, did not reveal the entire nature of his relationship with Aitana. He shared plenty for Trevor. Trevor is genuinely concerned. Looks and pointed queries regarding Maxwell's relationship with Dr. Goling, later revealed to be the thread that will begin to unravel the entire sordid affair. As the semester approached its finish, pressure on both Aitana and Maxwell intensified their friendship based on a foundation of manipulation and deception. Promises were beginning to shatter under the weight of its own contradictions. Neither could have predicted the violence culmination that lies right around the terrible ending to a romance. should not have started the catalyst for the dreadful events that followed arrived. The guise of an apparently innocuous email. Dr. Fiona Sullivan is the Dean of Liberal Arts contacted Aitana regarding Maxwell's a spectacular academic turnaround, expressed an interest in highlighting him in This Is Aitana's college newsletter. Well-intentioned inquiry triggered alarm bells the thought of extra inspection. Maxwell's accomplishments inspired her. In a state of fear, Aitana called Maxwell. In her office after hours, the tension was evident as she walked around the room. Outlining Maxwell was already in danger. After months of emotional exhaustion, manipulation felt the last vestiges of his self-esteem was deteriorating, and it was in this, the heated atmosphere, that Maxwell, finally, I had the confidence to confront his speech reflected the truth of their circumstances. He spoke barely above a whisper. "Isn't right, Aitana. What we're doing is." Aitana's reaction was devastating to me. Swift and nasty, her loving facade cracked, revealing the ruthlessness underneath. She reminded Maxwell of, despite everything she had done for him, his success was totally owing to her influence in the terrifying moment she asked, "Do you really? I think you'd be anything without me. You are nothing more than a small-town kid." With delusions of grandeur, I made you. Maxwell's eyes opened to the harmful nature. Their relationship experienced a boom of anger and self-preservation. He shot back. "This ends now. I'm going to notify the dean." Everything. The color was gone from Aitana's face is carefully designed. The world teetered on the edge of catastrophe. A last-ditch effort to keep she alternated between threats. This reminds Maxwell of the consequences they would both face if the truth came out. But something had Maxwell moved in the veil of adoration, and manipulation had lifted, revealing the harsh reality of his situation. Turned and left his hand on the doorknob. Moment. Aitana's voice, now icy cold, ended. "If you step out of that door, I will make." Maxwell halted, certain that he would never write again. Her words hung heavy in the. He walked without looking back. Out, leaving Aitana alone with the ruins. From her twisted fantasy, the following. The days were a haze for Maxwell and Aitana. Maxwell is encouraged by his decision. Disclosed the whole nature of the affair, together with his flatmate Trevor. We decided to approach Dean Sullivan, with meanwhile Aitana plunged toward the truth. Panicked, she swung between desperate efforts to contact Maxwell, desperate attempts to cover up her tracks. She deleted emails, shredded documents, and called in favors from co-workers to vouch for her. Character as Maxwell prepares to meet with. The dean couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Aitana's threats were echoed. However, he was determined to reclaim his life and integrity. Little did he know that Aitana had driven there. The imminent exposure of her crimes included developing a lethal scheme to silence him forever. On the night of the murder, Maxwell. He left the library shortly after midnight. His mind was focused with the encounter. Had scheduled with Dean Sullivan the next morning, he strolled down the desolate path that skirted the lake. I neglected to observe the figure emerging. From the shadows behind him, Aitana had spent the day in a frenzy. Planning her reasonable thinking had been overtaken by a toxic mix of fear and wrath, desperation in her twisted reality. Silencing Maxwell has become the only way to maintain the life she had constructed. Had waited for hours while watching a huge rock was grasped at the library entrance. Her hand trembled. Maxwell approached an isolated bend in the path. Aitana made her move first. Maxwell was caught off guard by the strike which sent him stumbling forward. He turned shocked. Betrayal was written on his face as he recognized his attacker, Aitana, whom I trusted. He gasped, but Aitana was beyond reason, with a strength derived from desperation. With a rock in her hand, she struck repeatedly. As he was on the ground, Maxwell's efforts to defend. He was weakened by his hesitant to hurt the woman he had previously admired and cherished. In the aftermath, Aitana stood frozen after her harsh behavior. The truth of what she had done crashed over her. The fog appeared to close in, muffling the sound of Maxwell's body as fell down the embankment into darkness. Waters in the lake with mechanical Aitana began to cover her. Tracks she gathered. Maxwell's scattered belongings, cleaning them clean. Fingerprints before throwing them into. She scoured the area for any water. Evidence that may connect her to the scene when the first light of dawn arrived, to break through the mist Aitana made. On her way back to her flat, clothing sodden and muddy throughout the next. For a few days, Aitana tried to maintain. She maintained a natural appearance while teaching her classes, attended faculty meetings, throughout, fighting the emotional maelstrom of her guilt and anxiety after Maxwell was reported missing. Despite participating in the search, she fainted with concern. The college organizes parties, but the consequences of her deeds took their toll. Colleagues noticed her disturbed demeanor and unexpected anxiousness. Psychology professor who had known Aitana for years later recalled her eyes were wild and tense. She moved as if she was always on the verge of flight. Aitana's carefully planned alibi began to unravel almost immediately. She had used the rock as a weapon hastily, abandoned in a dumpster behind her. A person discovered an apartment building. Maintenance worker security camera. The film showed her automobile near the lake, the night of Maxwell's disappearance, contradicting her claim to be home. All night during the investigation, Aitana's paranoia became increasingly intense. New heights. She became convinced everyone knew her secret in a moment. Panicked, she attempted to depart quickly, packing a bag and withdrawing significant amounts. It was cash from her bank account. This unpredictable behavior, which ultimately resulted in her undoing Maxwell's body weight. A bunch discovered something down, amid rocks. Students on a weekend fishing trip. The grim discovery triggered shockwaves through the Briarcliff community. This signified the beginning of the end, for Aitana Googled the discovery of Maxwell. Holloway's body transforms the missing person case into a full-fledged homicide. Samantha Reeves is an investigating detective, a veteran of the Briarcliff police. The department assumed care of the case. The initial actions were to secure the crime scene in order to be comprehensive. Forensic investigation of the region surrounding Lake Briarcliff exposed Maxwell had died from blunt force. Trauma to the head caused by drowning. Secondary causes of death are medical. The examiner observed defensive wounds on Maxwell's arms, showing he had attempted to protect himself from his attacker. As word of the murder spread through the academic campus of Briarcliff Community College, became a hotbed of curiosity and terror among pupils, muttered in corridors casting susp. They cast curious glances at their peers and professors, and the administration are desperate to govern the story, held conferences assuring parents, and this was an isolated community. Incident Detective Reeves and her crew began the tedious process of interviewing Maxwell's friends and relatives. Associates, it was during the early Trevor, Maxwell's roommate, gave interviews. Lawson provided the first vital lead. Trevor exposed Maxwell's troubles. Relationship with Professor Goling. Include sketchy references to an arrangement that had left Maxwell increasingly disturbed over the weeks leading up to his disappearance. Information led investigators to take a closer look at Aitana Goling. On the surface, she appeared to be grieving. Mentor is saddened over the loss of promising student, but as detectives uncovered more contradictions in her story, a breakthrough occurred when forensic analysts found signs of soil on the rock used to attack Maxwell. That matched Aitana's samples. Garden also has security footage from a petrol station near Lake Briarcliff, displayed Aitana's automobile in the region of the night of the murder, contradicting her. Aitana's alibi grew as evidence piled up. Colleagues started coming out with their own observations. A professor from the psychology department recalled a disturbing discussion with Aitana just days before Maxwell's disappearance. She appeared agitated, he told investigators. She kept talking about how she couldn't allow everything she had worked for to be destroyed by a misunderstanding. The investigation took another direction. Detectives discovered a series of emails between Aitana and Maxwell with caution. Worded, the subtext of these messages implied an inappropriate relationship. Forensic specialists recovered, deleted. Drafts of emails from Aitana's college account that were much more explicit. Describing her manipulation of Maxwell, her worries of vulnerability in the quest of Aitana's flat produced incriminating results. Evidence kept in a lockable drawer. Detectives discovered Maxwell's journal, which described the evolution of their relationship and his increasing desire to finish it, with a wealth of physical evidence and witness testimony. The district attorney's office felt, "I am confident," in charging Aitana Goling. The arrest was for first-degree murder, shockwaves in the community, breaking the picture of the bright, dedicated professor, exposing the dark underbelly of power relations in Aitana, was led away and handcuffed. The true extent of her deception began to unravel, leaving the Breercliff community to grapple with the question about how such a predator had concealed in plain sight for so long now. Aitana is full for the next couple hours. Confession surfaced, drawing a horrible image of manipulation and abuse of authority. Eventually, she told about her murder, initially drawn to Maxwell's talent and vulnerability, how easy it was to shape him to her will. Her voice was filled with bitterness as she narrated Maxwell's decision to reveal their relationship description.